Hello, and welcome to Lyla's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace, while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she explores the historic city of Boston, Massachusetts. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The train pulled into South Station just after 7 in the morning, the wheels giving that final sigh of arrival that always sounded to Lyla like relief. She gathered her small bag and stepped onto the platform, joining the flow of commuters and travelers moving through the station's grand concourse. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that floated lazily in the beams, and Lyla paused for a moment to get her bearings, consulting the quick text Ella had sent the night before about where to meet. Boston in May had a particular freshness to it, Lyla discovered as she stepped outside. The air was cool but not cold, carrying hints of spring flowers and the faint salt smell of the harbor. The city was already awake and moving, people hurrying past with coffee cups, cars navigating the complicated streets with what seemed like practiced aggression. And somewhere in the distance, a church bell marked the hour. Ella was waiting at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the station, visible through the window, her dark curly hair unmistakable. She looked up from her phone and broke into a wide grin when she spotted Lyla coming through the door, standing to pull her into a tight, happy hug. "You made it!" "How was the train?" "Smooth? I slept most of the way, actually. Very civilized mode of travel. Way better than flying, especially for this distance." "Come on, I already ordered you a coffee. Probably not like the exotic blends you get on your travels, but the caffeine still works," Ella said with a smile. They sat by the window, and Lyla wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for it. Ella had been living in Boston for almost 3 years now, working in something related to urban planning that she described with enthusiasm. She could tell that Ella loved it here, loved the layers of history and the walkability and the weird mix of old and new that defined the city. "So I thought we'd do the Freedom Trail," Ella said, pulling out her phone to show Lyla a map. "I know it's touristy, but it's actually a really good way to see a lot of the historic sites, and the weather's supposed to be perfect. Plus, I haven't done the whole thing in ages, so it'll be fun for me too. I'm completely in your hands. Lead the way." They finished their coffee and set out, Ella navigating the streets with the confidence of someone who'd walked them countless times. They headed toward Boston Common, the oldest public park in the country, Ella explained, dating back to 1634. The Common was green and lush, the trees fully leafed out and providing dappled shade, and people were already out walking dogs, jogging, or sitting on benches with books or phones. The Freedom Trail itself began with a red brick line embedded in the sidewalk, sometimes paint, sometimes actual bricks, that would guide them through the historic heart of the city. Ella had brought a small guidebook, though she seemed to know most of the stories already, sharing them in a way that made the past feel immediate and alive. Their first stop was the Massachusetts State House, with its distinctive golden dome gleaming in the morning sun. Ella explained that the dome had been covered in copper by Paul Revere's company and then later gilded with gold leaf. It sat atop Beacon Hill, commanding views of the common below, and there was something satisfying about its proportions, the way it managed to feel both grand and graceful at the same time. They continued through the streets of Beacon Hill, and Lyla found herself charmed by the neighborhood. Narrow brick sidewalks, gas lamps that still functioned, Federal-style row houses with purple window panes that Ella explained had turned that color when the original glass reacted to sunlight over the decades. Everything felt preserved but lived in, not a museum, but an actual neighborhood, where people hung flower boxes and left recycling bins on the curb. "This is one of my favorite parts of the city," Ella said as they walked down a particularly picturesque street, the brick houses painted in subdued colors, their doors glossy with fresh paint. "It's almost absurdly charming, but somehow it works." They passed Park Street Church, its white steeple rising impossibly tall and elegant, and then the Granary Burying Ground, where many notable figures from the Revolutionary period were buried. They walked through the cemetery, reading headstones, some of them tilted and worn with age, the inscriptions barely visible. Paul Revere, Samuel Adams, John Hancock, names that had seemed abstract from history books were suddenly right here, marked by simple stones in the earth. "It's strange, isn't it?" Lyla said quietly, standing near Samuel Adams' grave. "How history is both enormous and intimate. These were just people living their lives, and somehow they ended up in every textbook." "I think about that all the time here," Ella said. "Boston doesn't let you forget how close the past is. Like we're literally walking on the same streets they walked on." They continued to King's Chapel, a stone church with a distinctive architecture. Ella explained it was supposed to have a steeple, but they ran out of money. Inside it was cool and quiet, the pews worn smooth by centuries of congregants. Light filtered through tall windows, and the silence felt weighty with all the prayers and services and moments of contemplation that had filled this space. The trail led them next to the Old South Meeting House, where the Boston Tea Party had been organized, and then to the Old State House, a small brick building now dwarfed by modern skyscrapers that rose around it. Lyla loved the juxtaposition, this remnant of colonial government holding its ground while glass and steel towers loomed overhead. "The Boston Massacre happened right outside," Ella said, pointing to a circle of cobblestones in the street. "Always weird to see people just walking over it like it's nothing, which I guess it is, to most people rushing to work." They paused for a moment, looking at the spot, trying to imagine the chaos of that night in 1770. And then the modern city reasserted itself. A bus rumbled past, someone shouted into a phone, a bike messenger weaved through traffic with casual fearlessness. Faneuil Hall appeared ahead, the famous grasshopper weather vane visible on its cupola. The building was handsome and proportional, red brick with white trim, and Ella explained it had been both a marketplace and a meeting hall, earning it the nickname Cradle of Liberty for all the revolutionary speeches given there. They went inside briefly, looking at the portraits and the large hall on the second floor where debates and rallies had once filled the space with urgent voices. Now it was quiet except for a few other tourists, the wooden floorboards creaking underfoot, the windows letting in gentle light. Outside, Quincy Market stretched adjacent to Faneuil Hall, and the contrast was immediate. bustling and crowded with people, food vendors, street performers. The long building housed dozens of food stalls under its curved roof, and the smell of everything from lobster rolls to pizza to fudge mingled in the air. "Lunch?" Ella suggested, and Lyla nodded enthusiastically. They wandered through the market, surveying options, and eventually settled on different stalls, Lyla choosing clam chowder in a bread bowl and Ella going for a lobster roll. They found a spot to sit outside at one of the many tables scattered around the plaza, and Lyla dug into her chowder, which was thick and creamy and studded with tender clams and chunks of potato. It was exactly what she'd hoped for, warming and satisfying. Ella's lobster roll looked equally good, the meat piled high and glistening with butter in a perfectly toasted bun. They shared bites, as they always had, and Lyla had to admit the lobster was exceptional, sweet and fresh, the kind of thing that justified its price tag. Around them, street performers competed for attention. A jazz trio, a magician with a small crowd gathered, someone doing acrobatics. The energy was festive without being overwhelming, and Lyla found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it, people watching while they ate. "Aquarium next?" Ella asked, checking her phone. "It's just a short walk, and I think the harbor seals are doing a feeding at 2. They cleared their trash and made their way toward the waterfront, the streets opening up to views of Boston Harbor, the water sparkling in the midday sun. The New England Aquarium was housed in a modern building right on the water, and they joined the line to buy tickets, moving slowly but steadily forward. Inside, the central feature was the giant ocean tank, a 4-story cylindrical tank that spiraled up through the middle of the building, filled with tropical fish, sea turtles, and several reef sharks. They joined the ramp that wound around it, climbing slowly, stopping at different levels to watch the sea turtles glide past with their ancient, unhurried grace. "I love how they move," Lyla said, watching a turtle paddle by, its flippers moving in slow motion, like they're flying through water. "I could watch them for hours," Ella agreed. "There's something hypnotic about it." They continued up the ramp, pausing to look at smaller exhibits. Jellyfish pulsing in tanks lit with colored lights, their translucent bodies impossibly delicate. A touch tank where children were carefully feeling sea stars and hermit crabs under the watchful eye of an educator. Tropical fish in colors that seemed too vibrant to be real. On the upper level, they found the penguin exhibit, and a crowd had already gathered for the feeding. The penguins were African penguins, smaller than Lyla had expected, with distinct black and white markings and pink patches above their eyes. They waddled around on the rocks with great purpose, occasionally diving into the water with surprising speed and grace. The keeper began tossing fish, and the penguins' personalities emerged. Some were bold and pushy, others more hesitant. One in particular seemed to be very good at stealing fish meant for others. The keeper narrated, explaining each penguin's name and quirks, and the crowd laughed at their antics. After the feeding, they explored the rest of the aquarium at a leisurely pace. The seahorse exhibit with its tiny, impossibly delicate creatures, the octopus, who was hiding in a corner but visible if you looked carefully, the river otters, who were playing with such obvious joy that everyone watching couldn't help but smile. By the time they emerged back into the sunlight, it was late afternoon, the shadows growing longer, the heat of the day beginning to ease. They walked away from the touristy waterfront and toward the North End, Boston's historic Italian neighborhood. The character of the streets changed immediately. Narrower, more residential, the buildings pressed close together. Laundry hung from some windows, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes and baking bread drifted from restaurants preparing for the dinner rush. It felt like stepping into a different city, one with older rhythms and deeper roots. "This is the oldest residential neighborhood in Boston," Ella said. "Been an Italian community for over a century now, though it's changing like everywhere else. But you can still find the real deal if you know where to look." She led Lyla down a side street, stopping at a small bakery with a faded sign and a window display of cannoli and sfogliatelle. Inside, an elderly woman greeted them in rapid Italian, and Lyla responded, asking about the ricotta pie that was displayed on the counter. "Buonissima," the woman assured her, already reaching for it with practiced hands. "Made fresh this morning." They bought slices of the pie and a few cookies, the woman wrapping everything carefully in white paper and tying it with string. Outside, they leaned against a wall and tried the pie. It was indeed excellent, the ricotta filling light and not too sweet, the crust buttery and crisp. "How did you find this place?" Lyla asked. "One of my co-workers grew up in the North End. He gave me a list of spots that are fairly tourist-free. This is one of them." They continued walking, Ella pointing out details. A small shrine built into the side of a building, fresh flowers placed there regularly by someone, a doorway with worn marble steps, concave from centuries of feet, a narrow alley that dead-ended at a tiny courtyard with a fountain and a few potted plants. They stopped at a small shop that sold Italian imports, olive oils and vinegars, dried pastas in unusual shapes, packages of cookies and chocolates. The owner sat behind the counter reading a newspaper, and he looked up briefly to nod at them before returning to his reading. The shop had the feel of a place that had been there forever and would continue regardless of trends or changing neighborhoods. Ella bought a bottle of olive oil she swore by, and Lyla picked up some chocolate-covered almonds, more for the beautiful packaging than anything else. They chatted with the owner briefly when they paid, and he recommended a restaurant a few blocks away, saying it was where he ate when he didn't feel like cooking. "Should we trust him?" Lyla asked as they left. "Absolutely. Local recommendations are always the best." They walked toward the restaurant he'd suggested, taking their time, enjoying the neighborhood as it shifted into evening mode. People were coming home from work, greeting neighbors, stopping to talk on stoops. A group of older men sat outside a social club, playing cards and arguing cheerfully about something in Italian. A woman watered plants in her window box, calling down to someone on the street. The restaurant was small and unpretentious, with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles lining shelves on the walls. A man who might have been the owner seated them at a table by the window, brought them water and bread without asking, and presented menus that looked like they'd been laminated sometime in the previous decade. The menu was classic Italian-American: pasta with red sauce, chicken parmigiana, veal marsala. Lyla ordered spaghetti carbonara, unable to resist, and Ella chose eggplant parmigiana. The owner nodded approvingly at both choices and suggested a bottle of Chianti that was, he promised, very good and very reasonable. The wine arrived first, and it was indeed both good and reasonable. They sipped it slowly, the restaurant filling up around them with what appeared to be mostly locals. Families, couples, a group of men who greeted the owner by name and were immediately brought a bottle of wine without consulting the menu. The food came out after a wait that suggested it was being cooked to order. The carbonara was rich and creamy without being heavy, the egg coating each strand of pasta, the pancetta crispy and salty. Ella's eggplant was layered with sauce and cheese, the eggplant itself tender and flavorful. They ate slowly, savoring it, sharing bites across the table. "This is exactly what I wanted," Lyla said, twirling more pasta onto her fork. "Something real, not fancy, just good food made well." "The North End still has plenty of that, if you know where to look, though I worry it's getting harder to find." They lingered over dinner, ordering espresso and splitting a tiramisu that was served in a wine glass. The layers of coffee-soaked ladyfingers and mascarpone cream almost absurdly generous. By the time they finished, the light outside had faded to dusk, the streetlights coming on, casting pools of warm light on the sidewalks. They paid and stepped back outside, the air noticeably cooler now, and Ella suggested they walk toward the Rose Kennedy Greenway to end the day. They made their way out of the North End, crossing back toward the water, and soon the Greenway appeared. A ribbon of parks and gardens built where an elevated highway had once blocked the city from the harbor. The Greenway was beautifully maintained, with different sections offering different experiences. A fountain where children still played despite the hour, their squeals of delight echoing. A carousel with hand-carved animals that glowed with lights. Gardens planted with perennials that were just beginning to bloom, their scent sweet in the evening air. They walked slowly, not talking much, just enjoying the space and the gentle coming of night. Other people were out too. Couples walking hand in hand, people walking dogs, someone playing guitar near the fountain, the melody soft and wandering. They found a bench near a section of the park that had been planted with native wildflowers, and they sat, watching the city around them settle into evening. Lights were coming on in buildings, the skyline beginning to glow. Traffic moved past on adjacent streets, but the Greenway itself felt peaceful, a green corridor through the heart of the city. "Thank you for today," Lyla said. "This was wonderful. You've really made a home here, haven't you?" "I have," Ella said. "It took a while to figure out the city, but once I did, it started to feel right. Like it was waiting for me to understand it." They sat for a while longer, and Lyla thought about the day, the red brick line leading them through history, the weight of the past still present in stones and buildings, the taste of clam chowder and ricotta pie, and perfectly cooked pasta. She thought about sea turtles flying through water and penguins stealing fish, and the way neighborhoods could hold on to their character even as everything around them changed. Eventually, the chill in the air made them stand, and Ella walked Lyla back toward South Station, where she could catch her train back. The station was quieter now, the rush hour crowds gone, replaced by a more subdued flow of travelers. "Next time you come, we'll do Cambridge," Ella said as they hugged goodbye. "Harvard, MIT, all the bookstores. Just as much history, but a totally different vibe." "I'd love that. And you know you're always welcome to visit me." "I know. I'll take you up on that soon." Lyla watched Ella disappear into the evening, heading back to her apartment in whatever neighborhood she'd settled into, and then turned to find her platform. The train was already boarding, and she found a window seat, settling in as the train began to move, pulling out of the city. As Boston slid past the window, the lights, the mix of old and new, the layers of history visible even in darkness, Lyla felt that particular satisfaction of a day well spent. The rhythm of the train was soothing, the gentle rocking, the steady sound of wheels on tracks, and she closed her eyes, already drifting, carrying the day with her into dreams of sea turtles and red brick lines, and the unexpected beauty of cities that remembered their past while reaching toward their future.